Oh, hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to The Inugami Curse by Seishi Yokomizo, translated by Yumiko Yamazaki. The Yukigamine Mountains. December 14. On this memorable day, when light first began to illuminate the path to resolving the extremely convoluted case of the Inugami Clan, Kindaichi awoke in splendid condition. With the blind spot that had been hindering his thought processes finally removed, everything had fallen into place for him with great speed. All day yesterday, he had been stacking building blocks of deductive reasoning in his mind, with the result that now he had reproduced the entire complex structure of the mystery. All that was left was to find the real Kiyo, something which the police would surely succeed in doing this time because they now knew the man they were looking for, and they were even armed with his photograph. The previous night, for the first time in many days, Kindaichi had slept soundly. This morning, he had risen at around 8, enjoyed a leisurely soak in the hot spring, eaten breakfast, and was relaxing in his room when the phone rang. It was Chief Tachibana.
Mr. Kindaichi! Mr. Kindaichi!
The chief's voice, a bit shrill with excitement, made Kindaichi knit his eyebrows. What could have happened now, he thought, when there was nothing more to happen? Yes, it's me, Chief. Is something wrong?
Mr. Kindaichi, it's Kiyo. He showed up last night at the Inugami villa.
What? Kiyo? And did he do something?
Yes, but fortunately he failed. Mr. Kindaichi, could you please come to the station right away? We're going to go after him.
Yes, I'll be right there. Click. Kindaichi asked the front desk to call a pedicab for him. Then he pulled an Inverness cape over his kimono and half coat and rushed from the inn at a top speed. The snow had stopped during the night, and it was a sparkling bright day. The ice on the lake, the lakeside towns, and even the surrounding mountains were covered with a soft white blanket. The snow, being wet and heavy, was quick to melt, and one could hear the continual dripping from the eaves of the houses along the road. Kindaichi climbed out of the pedicab in front of the police station, where he saw 3 cars with ski equipment tied to their rear bumpers and several armed policemen milling about. When he hastened into Chief Tachibana's office, the chief and Furudate were standing, talking, wearing ski clothes and caps. Chief Tachibana looked at Kindaichi's kimono and frowned.
Mr. Kindaichi, that kimono's going to be difficult. Don't you have any Western clothing?
Chief, what's going on? You're not planning to abandon the case and go play in the snow, are you?
Don't be ridiculous. We got a report that Kiyo escaped into the Yukigamine Mountains. so we're going to go hunt him down.
Kiyo's gone into the Yukigamine Mountains. Kindaichi fixed his eyes on Tachibana with a start. Chief, you don't suppose he intends to kill himself?
There's a good possibility of that, so we have to capture him as soon as possible. But there's no way you'll be able to join us dressed like that.
Kindaichi grinned. Chief, don't write me off just yet. I'm from the northern part of the country, you know. I'm more used to skis than sandals, and all I have to do is tuck up my kimono so it doesn't get in the way. But I do need ski equipment.
We have skis for you. Shall we go then?
Just then, a policeman came bustling into the room and whispered something to Chief Tachibana. Nodding with determination, the chief said,
Okay, let's get started.
Uniformed policemen and plainclothes detectives were hanging on to the outsides of the first two cars. In the last car sat Chief Tachibana, Kindaichi, and Furudate, with an inspector in the driver's seat. Soon they were speeding through the town on roads muddy with melting snow.
Sugiyama, how far up can we go by car?
The chief asked the inspector who was driving. This snow's not so bad, so we should be able to reach the 8th station. We might slip and slide a bit though.
The rest should be easy if we can get that far. I never thought I'd have to take up skiing again at my age though. And I've never been good at mountain climbing either.
With the pounds and punch produced by liquor, it was not surprising that Chief Tachibana would find it hard to climb a snowy mountain. Chief, so what happened at the Inugami villa? What did Kiyo do? Asked Kindaichi.
That's right, I haven't told you yet. Last night, Kiyo showed up at the villa and tried to kill Tamayo.
Tamayo? Kindaichi stared in surprise.
Yes, Tamayo.
According to Chief Tachibana, Kiyo apparently sneaked into Tamayo's annex and hid in her bedroom closet while she was in the drawing room at Kindaichi's request. Around 11, Tamayo retired to her bedroom, turned off the lights, and got into bed. But perhaps because of her excitement, she had trouble falling asleep and tossed and turned for about an hour. She began to be bothered by a feeling of something not right in the closet. She thought she sensed someone inside it, moving and breathing. Tamayo is a brave woman. Turning on the lights, she put on her slippers, strode up to the closet, and opened the door. A man jumped out, a man hiding his face with a muffler, who pounced on her, pushed her down on the bed, and began choking her with both hands. Hearing the commotion, Monkey came dashing into the adjacent sitting room from the corridor. The bedroom door was locked from the inside, but that was no problem at all for the powerful giant. Monkey broke down the door and leaped into the bedroom. By that time, however, the intruder had already throttled Tamayo to the point where she was losing consciousness. Monkey immediately jumped on the culprit, who let Tamayo go and turned to come at him. Normally, Monkey would have found the intruder easy meat, but after a few exchanges, the intruder's muffler slid off. Monkey froze at the sight of his face, and Tamayo, who had been drifting into semi-consciousness, screamed. It was Kiyo. Monkey was paralyzed with shock. Kiyo dashed out of the bedroom just as Taranosuke and Kokichi came running. They too stood dumbfounded when they saw Kiyo's face, allowing him to escape into the snow. It was about 1 o'clock when this news reached me, and we got busy, setting up a cordon and so forth. Then I returned to the Inugami villa. Tamayo, the poor girl, had an awful bruise on her neck and was crying hysterically. Tamayo was crying? Kindaichi asked in surprise.
Of course she was crying. She nearly been strangled to death. She may seem strong, but after all, she's a woman.
And Matsuko?
Yes, Matsuko. I have trouble with that woman. She looked like a witch, with those glittering eyes, and she wouldn't say a word. It'll take some doing to make that one talk.
Still, I wonder why Kiyo went to such lengths to try to kill Tamayo. And where has he been hiding all this time?
Well, we'll just have to catch him to find out.
Chief Tachibana was in a good mood because he was starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Kindaichi, in contrast, fell silent, deep in concentration. The cars had already reached the road leading up to Yukigamine Mountains. As they climbed, houses disappeared beyond Hazama Shinden and Hazama village. But since quite a few skiers had already gone up the same route, the snow had been trodden down considerably, and the cars had much less trouble advancing than expected. Chief, I think we'll make it to the 8th level.
Great!
At Sasanoumi, a plainclothes detective on skis was waiting by the roadside. Chief, he's gone this way for sure. We're chasing him down right now.
Good.
The cars climbed on, snow squeaking under the tires. In the clear blue expanse of sky, the sun sparkled, and the brightness of the snow covering the mountains and ravines stung the eyes, while occasionally, from beside the road, snow would fall from the branches with a thud. When they reached Jizozaka at the 8th level, as far as the cars could safely go, everyone got out and began putting on skis.
Mr. Kindaichi, will you be all right?
I'll be fine, but I have to warn you, I'll look pretty ridiculous. Indeed, Kindaichi was a sight to behold. He took off the inverness and half-coat that he was wearing over his kimono and then removed his hakama trousers, pulled up the hem of his kimono, tucked it into his sash, and put on his socks and ski boots over his long knit underdrawers.
Mr. Kindaichi, you look...
Chief Tachibana burst out laughing. Don't laugh, Chief. Just watch how good I am. True to his word, Kindaichi was the most expert on skis of anyone in the group. With a ski pole on each shoulder, he scampered lightly up the mountain, while Chief Tachibana lagged behind out of breath, lugging his pot belly up the slopes. Soon the group had passed the 9th station and was approaching the peak at Numa no Daira when they met a plainclothesman skiing down from above. Hurry, Chief! We found him! And we're chasing him right now! The bastard's got a gun! They quickened their pace up the mountain. Suddenly, they heard an exchange of gunfire from above. Pow! Ping! Pong! Damn, they've started shooting. Kindaichi hopped up the steep path like a jackrabbit, soon searching the summit at Numa no Daira. But when he got there, he could not help but stop and cry out, "How beautiful!" Despite the pressing situation, the rolling hills of snow extended far and wide before him, and beyond that, the rugged mountains of Yatsugatake, also covered in white, looked close enough to touch. The deep blue sky, the ridges of snow with their light purplish glow. Kindaichi's ecstasy, however, did not last long, for he again heard gunshots from down the slope that was now before him. Ping! 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 Far below, he could see 3 plainclothes men encircling and gradually closing in on a man who was dressed like a repatriated soldier. The policemen who had climbed up with Kindaichi immediately swooped down the slope like a flock of swallows to join the others while Kindaichi followed, his kimono tucked up in his sash. The repatriated soldier was now surrounded on all sides with no possibility of escape. Having thrown away his ski poles, he was standing defiantly on his skis, face ghastly. His eyes were red and blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. He fired another couple of shots. Bang! Boom! Ba-blow! The police answered in kind. Kindaichi sped toward the group yelling, "Don't kill him! He's not the killer!" Startled by those words, the repatriated soldier turned back toward Kindaichi and for just a moment his eyes blazed fiercely like those of a wounded boar. He turned the hand that held the gun and raised it to his temple. "Stop him!" Kindaichi shouted. That same instant, someone must have managed to shoot the soldier in the hand, for the man dropped his gun and lay kneeling in the snow. Boom! Several plainclothesmen immediately pounced on him and handcuffed him. Chief Tachibana and Furudate drew closer. "Well, Mr. Furudate, do you recognize this man?" Furudate studied the man's face with bated breath, but soon averted his eyes grimly. "Yes, there's no mistake. This man is Kiyo Inugami." Chief Tachibana rubbed his hands together gleefully. But soon he turned toward Kindaichi with a frown. "Mr. Kindaichi, you said something strange just now, that this man isn't the murderer. What did you mean?" Kindaichi abruptly began scratching his head with great enthusiasm and said, beaming, "Just like I said, Chief. This man's not the murderer, although he'll probably insist that he is." At those words, Kiyo, who had been glaring at Kindaichi with fierce eyes, shook his handcuffed hands in utter despair and collapsed sideways onto the snow. Confession. December 15. Although the sunny weather that had continued from the previous day had melted much of the snow that had been burying the shores of Lake Nasu, the people of the town and its surroundings were gripped by an icy tension. They all knew that the prime suspect in the case of the Inugami Clan, the series of grisly murders that had terrified the region, had been captured the day before in the snowy Yukigamine Mountains. That this suspect was none other than Kiyo Inugami, and that the showdown between Kiyo and the others concerned in the case was about to take place today in the large room deep inside the Inugami Villa. They were aware, too, that this case, which had begun last October 18 with the death of Toyoichiro Wakabayashi, was finally drawing to a close. What no one could say, however, was whether Kiyo Inugami was indeed the murderer. That too would be made clear. Therefore, the people who lived around Lake Nasu watched the Inugami villa with bated breath. That same tatami mat room deep in the villa was now filled with tense faces. All tense except for that of Matsuko, who, with her usual obstinate expression, sat calmly smoking shredded tobacco in her long Japanese pipe, a tobacco tray by her side. What could this woman be thinking? Surely she too had heard that the real Kiyo had been captured yesterday in the Yukigamine Mountains. With that piece of news, no, even before that, in fact, the moment the results of the handprint comparisons were announced, she would know that the body found sticking feet up out of the lake was not her son's, and yet not a trace of emotion showed in her attitude or expression. Meeting the looks of suspicion and hatred from her sisters with seeming total indifference, she sat in detestable calmness, smoking her thin red bamboo-stemmed pipe. Even the fingertips that needed the shredded tobacco leaves were perfectly steady. At a little distance from Matsuko sat 4 people huddled together. Takeko and her husband Toranosuke, and Umeko and her husband Kokichi. In contrast to Matsuko's composure, this group was stricken with suspicion, terror, and anxiety. Takeko's abundant double chin shook constantly, no doubt from the overwhelming tension. Further apart was the solitary figure of Tamayo, sitting and waiting, while as lovely as ever she was not herself. Her eyes staring abstractedly, showing signs of a painful sorrow. Tamayo, who had always remained so prim, proper, and elegant, no matter what anyone said to her, no matter how hateful anyone glared at her, today seemed shaken. The strong sense of self that had always supported her seemed to have snapped in two, and strong shivers would occasionally run through her body. Sitting at a little distance from Tamayo was the koto teacher, Kokin Miyakawa. Apparently, she was still unaware of why she had been summoned to this event. She sat nervously in the presence of the 3 dreaded half-sisters. A bit further from Kokin sat Kindaichi and Furudate, the family lawyer. Having lost all composure, Furudate incessantly coughed, rubbed his forehead, and shook his leg. Even Kindaichi seemed excited, for he continued to scratch his head as he glanced at the others in the room. It was exactly 2 p.m. when the doorbell sounded in the distance. Bang bong! Everyone tensed, and soon, close upon the clamor of approaching footsteps from the other side of the veranda, there appeared Chief Tachibana, followed by Kiyo Inugami, staggering forward with his arms restrained on either side by a police detective and his handcuffed right hand wrapped pitifully in the white bandage. Reaching the sliding door, Kiyo stopped and looked around nervously at the assembled faces. But the instant his gaze reached Matsuko, he swung his face away. As he did, however, his eyes locked solidly with Tamayo's, and for a while the two remained immobile, like a tableau vivant. Soon, though, Kiyo made an anguished sound deep in his throat and averted his face. Tamayo slumped, head hanging, as if she had been released from a spell. It was Matsuko whom Kindaichi observed with the most interest during Kiyo's entrance. The sight of her son's face affected even her, for her cheeks instantly flushed and the hand holding the pipe trembled. She immediately reverted, however, to her usual ornery expression and resumed kneading her tobacco quietly and calmly. Kindaichi marveled at her strength of will.
Bring him in here!
At Chief Tachibana's command, one of the detectives pushed the shoulder of the handcuffed Kiyo. He staggered into the room and seated himself before Kindaichi as indicated by Tachibana. Two detectives sat behind him so they would be able to restrain him if necessary. Chief Tachibana sat next to Kindaichi. So, after a short silence, Kindaichi turned to the chief and asked, "Were you able to find out anything new?" His lips drawn tight in a frown, Chief Tachibana sullenly took a wrinkled brown envelope from his pocket.
"Read it,"
he said. Kindaichi took it from him. On the front was written, "Confession," and on the back, "Kiyo Inugami," in cursive style with a thick fountain pen. Inside was a piece of cheap stationery with a statement written in the same handwriting as on the envelope. "I, Kiyo Inugami, committed all the murders that have occurred in the Inugami Clan. No one else is involved. I confess to these murders before taking my own life. Kiyo Inugami." Kindaichi showed little interest in this confession. Without a word, he put the piece of stationery back inside the envelope and returned it to Chief Tachibana. "Did he have this on him?"
"Yes, in one of his pockets."
"But if he intended to kill himself, why didn't he just go ahead and do it? Why did he see the need to resist the police in that way?" Chief Tachibana knitted his eyebrows.
"What do you mean, Mr. Kindaichi? Are you saying that Kiyo had no intention of killing himself? But you were there yesterday, so you should know. If one of my men hadn't managed to shoot him on the hand, Kiyo would have killed himself for sure."
"That's not what I meant, Chief. Yes, Kiyo did in fact intend to kill himself, but he wanted to do it spectacularly and dramatically and draw as much attention to himself as possible. Doing so would enhance the effect of his confession." Chief Tachibana seemed unconvinced, but Kindaichi ignored the expression on his face. "Actually, what I said just now is wrong. I asked why Kiyo had seen the need to resist the police. But that's wrong. Kiyo wasn't resisting at all. He was just pretending to. He never pointed his gun at any policeman, but always at the snow. You saw that too, didn't you, Chief?"
Now that you mention it, I thought it a bit strange myself.
Kindaichi happily scratched his head. Please remember that well, Chief. It'll serve as evidence in his favor when his sentence is determined. Although Chief Tachibana again screwed up his face in dissatisfaction, Kindaichi paid that no heed and continued. By the way, did Kiyo say anything specific about this confession? Exactly how he killed the victims, for example?
Well, actually,
said Chief Tachibana with a scowl,
he refuses to say anything at all. He just keeps insisting that he is guilty of all the murders and that no one else is involved. He won't say anything else.
Just as I thought. But Mr. Kiyo... Kindaichi turned his affable smile toward Kiyo, who all this time had remained with his head hung in silence. His face indeed looked identical to that rubber mask his impostor had been wearing. But while the mask lacked all life and expression, the face in front of them now was most human and racked with a heart-breaking look of agony. Though the Tan, the son of Southeast Asia, had given him still remained, his face was haggard and drawn. Though the Tan, the son of Southeast Asia, had given him still remained, his face was haggard and drawn. Despite that, he was not unkempt. He was clean-shaven, and his hair, although of course disheveled, was neatly cut, as if he had recently been to a barber. Kindaichi, for some reason, gazed gleefully at Kiyo's neatly trimmed hair. But, Mr. Kiyo, he said again, it's simply not possible for you to have committed all those murders. In the case of Toyoichiro Wakabayashi, for example, it was October 18 when he was killed. But it wasn't until November 12 that you returned to Hakata from Burma using the name Sanpei Yamada. You've probably already heard from the chief, but the night Mr. Take was killed, the night of November 15, a man who appeared to be a repatriated soldier, calling himself Sanpei Yamada, spent a night at the Kashiwaya Inn in Lower Nasu. Moreover, after he left the inn, they found in his room a bloody towel printed with the words, Hakata, Friends of Returning Veterans. So, when the police made inquiries to Hakata, they found that there had been a man calling himself Sanpei Yamada among the shipload of repatriates who arrived in Hakata on November 12. Moreover, this man gave as his final destination the address 321 Kojimachi, Tokyo, the same address we have from the Kashiwaya Inn and the address of your house in Tokyo. In other words, you returned to Japan using an assumed name, but when asked for an address, you couldn't think of an appropriate one, and so you gave that of your house in Tokyo. Kiyo remained sitting in silence. It seemed that the others were listening more attentively to Kindaichi's monologue than he was. Now, the Sanpei Yamada, who arrived in Hakata on November 12, departed the following day for Tokyo. Since it would have been possible for him to make it to the Kashiwaya Inn in Lower Nasu on the night of the 15th, it follows that the Sanpei Yamada who appeared at the Kashiwaya Inn on the night of the 15th and the repatriated soldier called Sanpei Yamada who landed in Hakata on the 12th are one and the same. That is, that they both are you. Mr. Kiyo, do you understand what I'm trying to say? In other words, how is it possible for you who arrived in Hakata only on November 12 to have been the one who committed the murder of Toyoichiro Wakabayashi on October 18? As everyone watched Kiyo with bated breath, he nervously raised his face for the first time. He said, lips trembling. I don't know anything about the Wakabayashi murder. I'm just talking about the 3 people from this house who were killed. The Wakabayashi murder has nothing to do with this case. At that, Kindaichi suddenly began scratching his head with its tangled mess of hair so furiously that Kiyo, who was not familiar with Kindaichi's habit, grew wide-eyed in surprise. Chief, did you hear him just now? Mr. Kiyo tacitly admitted that he is the Sanpei Yamada who returned to Hakata on November 12 and the Sanpei Yamada who appeared at the Kashiwaya Inn on November 15. Recognizing that he had been had, Kiyo glared, a fierce gleam flashing in his eyes. Then, as resignation overtook him, his shoulders slumped and his head drooped forward. Beaming, Kindaichi said, I didn't mean to trick you, Mr. Kiyo, but I did want to confirm that. We've saved ourselves a lot of trouble now. By the way, it hasn't been clearly proven yet that the Wakabayashi murder is connected with the Inugami murders, but common sense would indicate that the same person was responsible. Let's leave that aside for now, though, and turn to the last murder, the murder of the fake Kiyo Inugami. He was killed sometime between 10 and 11 on the night of the 12th. But the autopsy report stated that it was about an hour after that when the body was plunged headfirst into the lake. Mr. Kiyo, were you here, that is, in Nasu at that time? Kiyo remained silent, now determined never to open his mouth again. Kindaichi smiled broadly and rang for the maid. Cling, 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 cling. When she appeared, he said, Could you bring in the people who are waiting in the other room, please? The maid left and returned immediately with 2 men, both young, one wearing a black jacket with a stand-up collar and the other wearing the khaki uniform worn by the repatriated soldiers. Chief Tachibana frowned in puzzlement. Chief, let me introduce these gentlemen to you. This is Mr. Keikichi Ueda, who works at the Upper Nasu train station. He was on duty taking tickets at the exit gate when the train from Tokyo arrived in Upper Nasu at 9:05 on the night of the 13th. The other gentleman is Mr. Ryuta Oguchi, pedicab driver who was waiting to pick up fares in front of the station around the same time. Now, Mr. Ueda, Mr. Oguchi, do you recognize this man? As Kindaichi pointed to Kiyo, the 2 men nodded immediately. That man, began the station employee, who must have already prepared what he was going to say, is one of the passengers who got off the train from Tokyo that arrived at Upper Nasu Station at 9:05 p.m. on the night of the 13th. I remember well because that was the night it was snowing so hard and he was acting rather strangely. His ticket had been issued at Shinjuku Station in Tokyo. The pedicab driver added, I remember him too. When the 9:05 train from Tokyo arrived on the night of the 13th, I was waiting to pick up fares outside the station, but only a few people got off that train. I asked this man if he wanted a ride, but he didn't say a word, kind of turned his face away and walked quickly away in the snow. I'm positive, the night of the big snowfall. I see. You might be summoned by the police again sometime, but that's all for now. Thank you very much. When the 2 witnesses had left, Kindaichi turned to Chief Tachibana. This morning, I took Mr. Kiyo's photograph and made inquiries at Upper Nasu Station. His hair It bothered me because it looks like it's only been 3 or 4 days since it was last cut. But Mr. Kiyo would never get a haircut around here, for he would not be able to hide his face at the barber shop. And even if the barber himself did not know Mr. Kiyo, he couldn't be certain someone who knew him wouldn't walk in. If Mr. Kiyo had gotten a haircut, therefore, it had to be somewhere else. So I went to the station to find out when he had arrived in Nasu, if he had been hiding his face. The photograph wouldn't have done any good, but I assumed that he probably wasn't doing that anymore. After all, he is, as you see, dressed in the manner of a repatriated soldier. But around Nasu these days, everybody is on the lookout for a man dressed like a repatriated soldier who is hiding his face. So while doing his best to avoid attracting attention, Mr. Kiyo could not hide his face, and he ended up being seen and remembered by those 2 witnesses. Kindaichi then turned to Kokin Miyakawa. Mrs. Miyakawa, you also arrived by train at Upper Nasu Station at 9:05 p.m. on the 13th, didn't you? Yes, I did. Kokin's voice was so soft as to be barely audible. You had read about Kiyo's murder in the evening paper in Tokyo and had rushed here in shock? Yes. Kindaichi looked at Chief Tachibana with a smile. Chief, do you see? Mrs. Miyakawa learned about the murder in the evening paper and rushed here from Tokyo. That means that Mr. Kiyo, who arrived from Tokyo on the same train, could also have read the evening paper in Tokyo. At least that's a possibility. In other words, Mr. Kiyo too could have read about the murder of his impostor in the evening paper and hastened to Nasu in dismay. But what for? To pretend to kill Miss Tamayo. Pretend? Did you say pretend? Tamayo's face jerked up. Color rose to her face, and as she looked at Kindaichi, her eyes filled with a strange ardor and shine. Ardor, an often restless or transitory warmth or feeling. Ardor, extreme vigor or energy. Ardor. Her eyes filled with a strange ardor and shine. Kindaichi answered in a comforting tone. That's right. Pretend. Mr. Kiyo had no intention whatsoever of really killing you. He just pretended to try to kill you so his confession would be more effective. Suddenly, emotion consumed Tamayo's body. Shaking violently, she stared back at Kindaichi, eyes wide with feeling. But then her eyes suddenly grew misty. The tears began to flow, and soon she was sobbing uncontrollably, choking on her tears. Shizuma and Kiyo. Tamayo's outburst surprised even Kindaichi, and he remained dumbfounded for a while, staring at her. Kindaichi had always thought Tamayo a strong woman, which she indeed was. He had thought, however, that her strength unfortunately often made her unfeminine. The Tamayo weeping in front of him now, however, was a pitiful creature sending forth a painful message of solitude with every sob. He thought he was seeing her soul for the first time. Kindaichi cleared his throat and said, Miss Tamayo, was what happened the other day? Was Mr. Kiyo's attempt on your life such a shock to you? Tamayo continued weeping audibly. her hands pressed to her face.
I just couldn't believe Kiyo was guilty of those murders. So, when he tried to kill me, I thought maybe he had done so because he suspected me of being the murderer. I couldn't bear that. It was so painful. I don't care what anybody else thinks. I don't care at all. But I just couldn't bear for Kiyo to think me a murderer. No, I couldn't bear that.
Tamayo began weeping passionately again, shoulders shaking. Kindaichi turned to Kiyo. Mr. Kiyo, did you hear what she said? In your attempt to protect someone, you nearly killed Miss Tamayo's soul. You should think more carefully before you act. Miss Tamayo, don't cry anymore. Why did an intelligent woman like yourself not realize that the attack on you the other day was just a charade? After all, Mr. Kiyo had a gun, so if he had really wanted to kill you, he could have done so with a single bullet. If he were planning to kill you and then to escape unscathed, that would be one thing. But he was prepared to kill himself from the first. It's not that he tried to kill you, failed, was chased down by the police, and then tried to commit suicide when there was no way out. That's just not a plausible scenario. Since he already had a signed confession in his pocket, no doubt he had it with him even before he left Tokyo. Because I can't believe he would stop to buy stationery and an envelope while he was running from the police after his attack on you. No, he was determined to take his own life even before he left Tokyo. A man who is prepared to die would not be concerned about a gunshot being heard. So, on the night of the 13th, if Mr. Kiyo had really wanted to kill you, he could have shot you dead and then killed himself as well. There and then. Following that line of reasoning, you can see that the attack of that night was a charade.
I understand,
Tamayo answered quietly. She was no longer crying, and as she gazed at Kindaichi, her eyes were filled with indescribable gentleness and gratitude.
You have saved me from the agony of hell. How can I ever thank you?
They were the first tender words he had heard from her. Kindaichi, totally abashed, stammered, "Oh, it is nothing. Nothing at all." And briskly scratched his head all around. Soon, however, he swallowed hard and continued. Gulp. Now, so we know that Mr. Kiyo came here from Tokyo on the night of the 13th, and that he pretended to attack Miss Tamayo. We still cannot state positively, however, that he is unconnected with the murder of the fake Kiyo on the night of the 12th, because it would have been possible for him to kill his imposter that night, leave for Tokyo on the last train or one early the next morning, and still be back in Nasu at 9:05 on the night of the 13th. That is not impossible. Although any way you look at it, it is quite illogical, for after all, why go to so much trouble when he could have just gone ahead and attacked Miss Tamayo also on the night of the 12th and then killed himself? Moreover, there's also the issue of Mr. Kiyo's hair. Kindaichi smiled at Kiyo's head. I'm positive Mr. Kiyo's hair was cut quite recently, so if we distribute his photograph to all the barbers in Tokyo and call their attention to it, we'd no doubt be able to find out where he got his haircut. Even if locating the barber turns out to be inadequate, to establish his alibi, we should be able to trace his movements from there and find out where he was on the night of the 12th. Mr. Kiyo, how about it? Do you think we'd be able to establish an alibi for you? Kiyo remained sitting with his head hung, his shoulders shaking violently and his forehead covered with oily sweat. It was obvious that Kindaichi's words had found their mark. Chief Tachibana edged forward.
Are you saying that Kiyo came to Nasu on the night of the 13th to play the role of the murderer in order to protect someone?
Exactly. The murder of the fake Kiyo must have come unexpectedly for Mr. Kiyo too, and when he learned about it in the evening paper of the 13th, it was a devastating shock. Also, whereas before in the cases of Take and Tomo, it had always been contrived to make it seem the culprit had come from or been outside the estate, no such measure had been taken this time, so he felt if he did not act, the real murderer would be found out. So, Mr. Kiyo made up his mind to sacrifice himself to protect the real murderer.
Who then? Who's the murderer?
Chief Tachibana's voice sounded like he had something stuck in the back of his throat, but Kindaichi's reply was quite nonchalant. I think it should be quite obvious by now. Mrs. Matsuko, of course. Silence filled the room. No one was particularly impressed. No one was particularly surprised. Everyone had realized the truth midway through Kindaichi's explanation, so the looks that were turned in unison toward Matsuko the moment Kindaichi said her name were loaded with disgust and hatred, but not with surprise. Even surrounded by these malicious eyes, however, Matsuko remained perfectly composed, and as she sat quietly working her tobacco, a faint wry smile appeared on her lips. Kindaichi edged forward. Mrs. Matsuko, you will tell us everything, won't you? Yes, I'm certain you will, for everything you did was for Mr. Kiyo's sake, wasn't it? If Mr. Kiyo manages to play the role of the murderer successfully, then all your efforts will have been for nothing. Matsuko, however, neither heard nor saw Kindaichi, but gazed intently at her son. Kiyo, welcome home. If I had known that you would return safe and sound like this, I would never have acted so foolishly. Nor would I have needed to, since Tamayo would surely choose you. Her words and tone were filled with a gentleness hitherto unimaginable from the usual Matsuko. Tamayo blushed, while Kiyo sat with downcast eyes, his shoulders trembling. Kiyo, dear, Matsuko continued, when did you return to Japan? Oh, that's right. Mr. Kindaichi just said that you landed in Hakata on November 12th. Then why didn't you wire me from there? Why didn't you come home right away? Then I wouldn't have had to kill those people. Kiyo began speaking as if groaning in pain, but then, with a shudder, he abruptly raised his face in determination. No, mother. You know nothing about any of this. This is all my doing. I killed the three of them. Be quiet, Kiyo! Matsuko's words lashed out like a whip. Whoosh. She immediately softened her tone again, however, and continued, Kiyo, dear, your attitude is torturing me. I know you're doing this for me, but your actions are torturing me. If you understand what I'm saying, then tell me everything honestly. Just what was it that you did? Was it you who cut off Take's head and carried Tomo's corpse to Toyohata village? I never wanted you to do anything like that."
Kindaichi began furiously scratching his head. Just as I thought. So, you weren't accomplices in the usual sense of the word. Mr. Kiyo was secretly cleaning up after Mrs. Matsuko without even telling her.
Matsuko turned to Kindaichi for the first time. "Mr. Kindaichi, I'm not a woman who would try to enlist someone, especially my own son, to help me with something like this. Besides, if I'd known that Kiyo had returned unharmed, I wouldn't have needed to kill anyone."
"I understand. I imagine that was probably what had happened. But since that would involve figuring in so many chance occurrences..." "Yes, chance. Horrible chance occurrences. Horrible chance occurrences happening again and again." It was Kiyo who spoke with a groan. Kindaichi looked compassionately at his haggard profile.
"Ah, Mr. Kiyo, you admit it too. Yes, it's for the best. As your mother says, it's best you tell us everything honestly. Will you tell us, or shall I speak in your place?"
Kiyo looked at Kindaichi's face in surprise, but when he saw the detective's confident look, he immediately slumped dejectedly and said, "Please, you tell them. I can't do it."
"Mrs. Matsuko, is it all right with you? Please, go ahead." Matsuko answered with a voice that was perfectly composed, smoking her pipe as calmly as ever.
"All right then, I will speak on your behalf. Mrs. Matsuko, Mr. Kiyo, please don't hesitate to correct me whenever I'm wrong."
Kindaichi paused briefly and then continued.
"As I said before, Mr. Kiyo returned to Japan on November 12 under the assumed name of Sanpei Yamada. I have no idea why he was using such a name, although I'm sure he will eventually tell us. Anyway, the first thing he did upon returning to Japan, having once been a repatriated soldier myself, I speak from experience when I say this, he read a newspaper. All repatriates are starving for news about what is happening back home, and to answer that need, all the repatriate reception centers have back issues of newspapers bound together for them to read. Mr. Kiyo too no doubt reached eagerly for these back issues as soon as he had landed in Hakata, and what he discovered there..." Kindaichi looked around at the faces in the room. "As you know, it was November 1 when Mr. Inugami's will was read in front of the fake Kiyo. This became nationwide news and was written up extensively in the newspapers of November 2. Mr. Kiyo must have read one of those articles in Hakata and received a terrible shock, for he learned that someone had entered his home pretending to be him."
"Kiyo!" interrupted Matsuko shrilly. "Why didn't you wire me immediately? Why didn't you tell me he was an imposter? If you had, all this wouldn't have happened."
Kiyo tried to say something, but immediately hung his head as if he had lost his nerve. Kindaichi answered for him.
"That's right, Mrs. Matsuko. It's just as you say. If he had, all this wouldn't have happened. But Mr. Kiyo had some ideas of his own. No doubt he had some suspicion about who this imposter was. Someone whom he could not despise. Someone for whom he perhaps even felt some compassion. So, instead of exposing him directly, he tried to conduct matters in secret. Something that turned out to be a mistake."
"Just who was this imposter?"
Chief Tachibana asked. Kindaichi hesitated, for it was a name that it pained him to say, yet it was not something that could remain unsaid. "I can't be sure unless I ask Mr. Kiyo," he mumbled. "But if I may be allowed to exercise my imagination, I think I think it might have been Shizuma. I knew it! Kokin Miyakawa cried out, making sweeping motions in front of her with her hands. She shuffled once, twice, forward on her knees. Oh, God, so that really was Shizuma. I had that feeling ever since you asked me if Shizuma and Mr. Kiyo resembled each other. Oh, God. Then when he took my hand that day, he knew he was holding his mother's hand. Suddenly, tears began to stream from Kokin's nearly blind eyes. But it's so cruel. How can the god be so cruel? Yes, Shizuma was wrong to return to Japan pretending to be someone else. But how can God be so cruel as to kill him before he could reveal his identity to his own mother, who had been waiting for him so anxiously? Kokin's lament was understandable. What unfortunate people they were. No one would ever know why Shizuma had decided to pretend to be the heir apparent to the Inugami throne. But his impersonation had prevented him from revealing his identity to his own mother, even though she was right before his eyes. What was more, his pretense had led to his murder. If the true facts of this case had not been brought to light, he would have been forever buried as Kiyo Inugami, and Kokin would have forever waited in vain for her son. Kiyo sighed gloomily, while Takeko and Umeko drew up their shoulders in fear. Only Matsuko remained calm and composed, playing with her long pipe. Waiting for Kokin's outburst to subside, Kindaichi turned to Kiyo. Mr. Kiyo, were you together with Shizuma in Burma? We were both in Burma, but in different units, Kiyo replied softly. But because we looked so much alike, our resemblance became a topic of conversation in both units, and one day Shizuma came to meet me. He knew my name, and when he introduced himself and told me about his background, I recognized what he was talking about. My mother and aunts would never talk about it, but grandfather had told me what had happened. You forget old grudges when you are fighting on the front lines, and Shizuma too let bygones be bygones and shook my hand in friendship. For a while after that, we would come and go and enjoy talking about each other's past. But then, the fighting gradually intensified, and we were separated. According to what Shizuma told me later, he had heard that my unit had been wiped out, and had assumed that I had been killed as well. Then, when he was wounded in the face like that and ended up being separated from those who knew him, he decided to take my place. Everything was so crazy on the Burmese front, you could get away with a far-fetched plan like that without anyone becoming suspicious. At that point, Kiyo sighed deeply again.